The sun was a searing copper coin, burning its way down the western sky. For a 10-year-old girl named Scarlett, alone in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the dusty plains, every day was a battle. She lived in a small, weathered ranch cabin, a lonely sentinel amidst a sea of sagebrush and rock. 3 months had passed since her grandmother, the only family she had ever known, had gone to the spirits. The silence of the cabin was a heavier weight than any chore, and the only company she kept were the ghosts of her own loneliness. She was a wisp of a thing, with a mane of fiery red hair and eyes as gray as the prairie dust. Her clothes were patched, her hands calloused, but her spirit was a stubborn thing, forged in the crucible of this harsh land. That evening, as the shadows stretched long and thin, Scarlett was returning from the creek with 2 pails of water. The wind, a constant, mournful voice out here, carried a different sound this time, a sharp, pained cry that cut through the silence like a knife. It was a sound no child should ever make. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she dropped the pails and sprinted toward the sound, her boots kicking up clouds of fine red dust. She found her at the edge of the creek, half hidden by a cluster of gnarled cottonwood trees. It was a girl no older than herself, with long, dark braids matted with mud and face paint. Her buckskin tunic was torn, and she was clutching her right ankle, her face a mask of silent agony. What truly caught Scarlett's attention, however, was the dark, swollen puncture wound on the girl's calf. A rattlesnake bite. The venom was already working its poison, her leg grotesquely puffed up and tinged with a sickly purple. Most folks in the settlement would have turned and run, their minds filled with whispered tales of savage raiders and red-skin dangers. But Scarlett only saw a child in pain. Her grandmother had taught her to respect the land and its people, and she'd often said, "A life is a life, no matter the color of the skin it wears." Without a moment's hesitation, Scarlett knelt, her mind racing. Her grandmother had kept a small pouch of herbal remedies for just such an occasion. She tore a strip from her own worn apron and used it to bind the girl's leg above the wound, a desperate attempt to slow the venom's spread. The girl winced, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of pain and suspicion. She spoke a string of urgent words in a language Scarlett didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. The girl was telling her to leave, but Scarlett held her gaze, a silent promise in her eyes. It was a promise of a different kind, a shared humanity that transcended all of the fear and prejudice. With immense effort, Scarlett managed to half carry, half drag the injured girl toward the cabin. The girl, who introduced herself as Cheyenne with a hoarse whisper, could barely put any weight on her damaged leg. The journey was long and agonizing, a slow, painful pilgrimage across the darkening prairie. By the time they reached the small wooden porch, both girls were exhausted and caked in dust. Part 2. The Night of Shared Silence. Din Binonan. Inside the cabin, the single lamp cast a warm, yellow glow, a stark contrast to the encroaching darkness of the wilderness. Scarlett worked quickly, her hands sure and steady. From a small tin box on the shelf, she retrieved a pouch of dried plantain leaves and a jar of thick tallow. Her grandmother had taught her to poultice wounds, a skill she now applied with a focus born of desperation. The snake bite was angry and inflamed, but Scarlett's touch was gentle as she applied the salve and wrapped it tightly with strips of old linen. Cheyenne endured the treatment with the stoicism of a true warrior. She watched Scarlett with an unblinking intensity, her eyes filled with a curiosity that seemed to peer right into Scarlett's soul. As the night deepened, Scarlett prepared what little food she had, a small pot of thin stew and a few dry biscuits. They sat by the flickering firelight, 2 children from different worlds, their only language being that of kindness and shared vulnerability. Scarlett found an old faded buffalo robe and laid it out for Cheyenne by the fire. "It's warm," she whispered, her voice rough from lack of use. Cheyenne nodded, her lips forming a small, grateful smile. As Scarlett tucked herself into a corner, wrapped in a threadbare quilt, she allowed herself a moment of comfort. For the first time in months, she wasn't truly alone. Cheyenne's presence filled the silent cabin, and the feeling was as soothing as the fire's crackle. What Scarlett couldn't have known, however, was that Cheyenne wasn't just a lost girl. She was the daughter of Two Rivers Chief, the powerful leader of the Crow tribe, and a search party of 50 of his finest kinsmen had been scouring the plains for 2 days. Their trail, a series of snapped twigs and bent blades of grass, led directly to this lonely ranch. The first hint of morning was not the rising sun, but a low rhythmic thud that vibrated through the floorboards. Scarlet woke with a start, her heart instantly thrumming a frantic rhythm. The sound was like a distant thunderstorm, growing closer with every beat. The sound of many hooves moving in unison. She crept to the cabin's single window and peered through a narrow gap in the dusty glass. Her blood ran cold. They were there, dozens of them, painted warriors on horseback, their faces stark and unyielding in the pale pre-dawn light. Their horses, powerful and black, moved with an eerie silence, circling the cabin like vultures. Feathers were woven into their long hair, and their weapons glinted ominously at their sides. All 50 of them were here, a perfect ring of steel and muscle, sealing off any hope of escape. Scarlet's mind went to the stories her grandmother had told her, the campfire tales of homesteads burned to the ground and families taken in the night. She had saved a life, but now it felt as though she had signed her own death warrant. Cheyenne stirred on the buffalo robe, her eyes still clouded with fever. When she heard the familiar rhythm of her people as horses, her face transformed. Relief and a kind of wild joy flooded her features. She tried to stand, her leg giving way, but her voice rang out in a jubilant cry, a rapid stream of words that Scarlet could not understand. The warriors outside, however, did not respond with joy. Their voices rose in harsh commands, and Scarlet heard the sickening thunk of bows being readied. Through the window, she could see the leader, a man whose sheer size and presence commanded respect even from this distance, dismounting his horse with a deadly, focused purpose. Terror flooded through Scarlet's small body. Everything she had ever been warned about was now at her doorstep. She had shown kindness, but in this world, kindness was a weakness. Cheyenne, seeing the fear in Scarlet's eyes, reached out with surprising strength. She grasped Scarlet's hand, her meaning clear even without shared language. She would explain. She would tell them what Scarlet had done. But would they listen? Or would they see Scarlet's simple act of compassion as an act of treachery, a capture rather than a rescue? The footsteps outside grew closer, deliberate and measured. The low murmur of voices discussing something in their native language had an angry, grim tone. Cheyenne struggled to her feet despite her injured leg, leaning heavily against the wall as she prepared to face her people. She looked back at Scarlet with eyes that seemed far older than her 10 years. In that moment, both girls understood that everything would change when that door opened. The knock came like a thunderclap, 3 sharp raps that seemed to shake the entire cabin. But it was not the violent battering Scarlet had expected. It was controlled, almost respectful, as if they were requesting permission rather than demanding entry. Still, Scarlet's hand trembled as she reached for the wooden latch, knowing that her next action would decide whether she lived to see another sunset on these plains. Part 3. The Chief's Judgment. Sao Tar Ro. The heavy wooden door swung inward, revealing the most imposing man Scarlet had ever seen. Two Rivers. Chief stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking out the morning light. His face was streaked with ceremonial paint, his dark eyes holding the kind of authority that came from leading his people through a life of hardship and war. But those fierce eyes softened the moment they fell upon Cheyenne. He spoke a single word, what sounded like a name spoken with infinite relief. Cheyenne responded with a flood of words in her native tongue. Her voice was urgent but respectful as she gestured toward Scarlet, pointing to her bandaged leg, to the poultice, to the empty bowl that had held their shared meal. Scarlet stood frozen in the doorway, barely reaching the chief's chest as more warriors gathered behind him. Their faces remained unreadable, but she could feel their eyes taking in every detail. The scattered medical supplies on the table, the blood-stained cloth from Cheyenne's wounds, the careful way the girl favored her injured leg. As Cheyenne continued speaking, something remarkable began to happen. The tension that had filled the air started to dissipate. The chief's expression changed from stern authority to something that looked almost like wonder. He listened to his daughter's rapid account, his gaze shifting between her and the small white child who had clearly spent the night caring for her. Finally, Cheyenne finished her account. She looked at her father and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she took Scarlett's hand and placed it over her own heart, a gesture so simple, yet so profound. The chief looked at Scarlett for a long moment, a silent assessment of her character. Then he did something that shocked everyone present, including his own warriors. The great chief knelt down on one knee, bringing himself to Scarlett's eye level. His voice was a low rumble as he spoke his first words to her in halting but clear English. "You saved my heart," he said, placing a large hand over his chest. He gestured toward Cheyenne. "My daughter, my heart, you save." The warriors behind him exchanged glances of pure amazement. Their chief, a man who had never bowed to any man, was kneeling before a child. But what he said next would change not just Scarlett's life, but the relationship between two worlds that had known only conflict for generations. Two Rivers' chief reached into a leather pouch at his side and withdrew a magnificent necklace. It was made of braided rawhide, and from it hung two polished black bear claws. "This," he said slowly, "belonged my father, his father before many generations. Only given to family, to blood." Cheyenne's eyes widened in shock, and she spoke rapidly to her father in their language, her voice filled with what sounded like disbelief. But the chief raised his hand for silence. "You have no family," he continued, looking directly into Scarlett's eyes. "We have no daughter like you, but heart knows truth, spirit knows kindness. You are sister to Cheyenne now, daughter to two rivers." Part 4, A New Horizon, Hastag. The bear claw necklace felt warm and heavy against Scarlett's chest as he placed it around her neck. The moment it settled, she felt something shift in the air. The warriors who had seemed so threatening just moments before now looked at her with expressions of respect and acceptance. The chief wasn't finished. "Alone is dangerous," he said, gesturing toward the cabin. "Winter comes soon. No family to help, no protection." He stood to his full height. "You come with us. Learn our ways. Cheyenne, learn your ways. Both daughters now." Scarlett's mind reeled. Everything she had ever known. This cabin, her grandmother's memory, was being offered up for something completely unknown. The fear of abandoning her past warred with the terror of facing another winter alone. Cheyenne limped forward and took her hand, speaking softly. "Come, sister. Safe. Warm. Family." The word family hit Scarlett like a physical blow. The loneliness that had been her constant companion suddenly felt unbearable in the face of this unexpected offer. As if summoned by his words, a cold wind swept through the open door, carrying the scent of snow. Scarlett shivered. The chief stepped back, giving her space to process his offer, but his next words sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the wind. "Other dangers come soon. Soldiers look for Cheyenne's trail. Find tracks to cabin. Better not be here when they come." The chief's warning about the cavalry patrols that swept through the territory struck a new fear into Scarlett's heart. She knew those soldiers often saw kindness as treachery. "How long?" she whispered. One of the warriors spoke urgently to his chief. Two Rivers' expression darkened. "Sun high today," he said, pointing to the sky. "Maybe sooner." The reality crashed over her. Stay here and face interrogation, or worse, or leave everything behind and venture into a world completely unknown. Cheyenne began to carefully gather Scarlett's few possessions. Her grandmother's quilt, a small wooden doll, a tin box holding a few treasured books, and her grandmother's wedding ring. Two warriors moved to help, their hands surprisingly gentle as they packed her belongings. "You bring grandmother's spirit," the chief said. "Honor ancestors. We understand this." A new fear seized Scarlett's heart. What if I can't learn your ways? What if I don't belong? For the first time since he had arrived, the chief smiled. "Cheyenne could not walk river alone," he said simply. "You teach her strength. She teach you belonging. Both learn together." The sound of distant hooves echoed across the valley, still far away, but approaching fast. "Soldiers," he said grimly, "time to choose is now." Scarlett looked at the cabin one last time. Then she looked at Cheyenne, whose eyes were full of hope and friendship. She looked at Two Rivers Chief, who had offered her something she thought she'd lost forever. She reached up and touched the sacred necklace resting against her chest, feeling its weight and warmth. Then she made the decision that would reshape her world. "I'm ready." The moment she spoke, the warriors moved with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, her few possessions were secured on horseback, and a gentle mare was brought forward. Two Rivers lifted Scarlet onto the horse's back as if she weighed nothing. "Hold tight to sister," he instructed. "She keep you safe on horse. You keep her safe in heart." As they rode deeper into the wilderness, Scarlet understood that she was entering a world that existed parallel to everything she had known. This was not empty frontier land. This was home to a people who knew every stream, every game trail, every place where medicinal herbs grew. As the sun reached its peak, they crested a ridge that took her breath away. Below them was a hidden paradise where a clear river meandered through grasslands dotted with teepees. "Home," Cheyenne whispered, and Scarlet heard the joy and relief in her voice. As they began their descent, she noticed that people were stopping to stare. Some expressions were welcoming, but others displayed obvious concern. The chief rode ahead to speak with a group of tribal leaders who had gathered near the largest teepee. Their conversation was brief but intense. Then the entire tribe gathered in a large circle around them. "My people must hear the story," the chief explained to Scarlet. "Must understand why White Child wears sacred necklace. Must decide if village accepts new daughter." Scarlet's heart hammered as her fate hung in the balance. The chief recounted the events of the past day, how his daughter had been lost, and how a small white child had risked her life to save a stranger. Cheyenne then added her own testimony, her young voice clear and strong. She spoke with passion about Scarlet's courage at the creek and the gentle care she had received through the night. The debate that followed was respectful but thorough. Some voices expressed concern about bringing a white child into their community. But it was a small voice that ultimately swayed the decision. A boy no older than 6 pushed through the crowd and walked directly to Scarlet. He looked up at her with bright, curious eyes and said something in his native tongue that made the entire circle fall silent. The chief translated, his voice thick with emotion. He says, "She has the same sad eyes as me. When my mother went to the spirits, sad children should not be alone." An elderly woman, with a face marked by the wisdom of many seasons, stepped forward and gently touched the bear claw necklace resting against Scarlet's chest. When she spoke, her tone had changed completely. The chief smiled as he translated her words. "Grandmother Singing Bird says, 'The spirits sent you to save Cheyenne because they knew we needed to save you too.' She says, 'A child brave enough to save a stranger is a child worthy of our protection.'" The circle erupted in voices of agreement and welcome. Women came forward with gifts of clothing and food, while children gathered around with shy but friendly curiosity. Men nodded their respect. As the sun began to set, Scarlet found herself sitting by a warm fire, Cheyenne beside her, surrounded by the sounds of a family larger than she had ever imagined possible. The lonely ranch felt like a memory from another lifetime. Here, in this place where two worlds had learned to meet in friendship, she had found something more precious than safety. She had found a home.